Who helped you the most? Who was just a waste of roster space? And what should you look for come 2007? Hey, how are you? Jason Horowitz with you. One final week for the Chase Fantasy Football Series exclusively here on CBS Sportsline. We'll answer all those questions here today on who's hot, who's not, as well as on roster trends coming your way starting Wednesday, December 27th. But let's get to who's hot, who's not, and to help hand out the season awards, we bring in CBS Sportsline senior fantasy writer Jamey Eisenberg via satellite from Miami. And Jamey, it's been a great season. It's time to wrap it all up. You're the awards guy. Where would you like to start, Jamey?
Well, Jason, you got to start with what helps fantasy users the most, and that's playing the waiver wire and picking guys up as the season goes on, because that's certainly the most important thing. And there are three guys, if you pick them up, you might be playing for or have already played for your fantasy championship, and that's wide receiver Marquez Colston, quarterback Tony Romo, and running back Ladell Betts. You can almost separate them into each part of the season, because Colston was the guy early on, Romo was the guy in the middle, and Betts the guy at the end with 5 straight 100-yard rushing games.
Yeah, that's very true, and they may have helped you get through different parts of the season, just like you said. Well, Colston was a rookie, so we'll take him out of the equation. But, Jamey, who are your best rookies of the season?
Well, obviously, Vince Young is sort of running away with the Rookie of the Year award, and he's been great for fantasy users the last few weeks. Certainly, he's been great, you know, if you're able to pick him up and use him at times during the season, depending on the matchup. But he's running the ball, he's throwing the ball, he's getting a touchdown almost every week that he's a starter. And then Maurice Jones-Drew. I mean, you're talking about a guy who is in the top 10 in most running backs for most fantasy leagues. He's getting touchdowns every week. He's going to be a great guy next year, especially with Fred Taylor being on the way out in his career.
And Vince Young had 3 touchdowns in the win at Buffalo, 2 through the air, 1 on the ground. I agree with you. I think I can't find a better rookie, especially for the last half of the season, than Vince Young.
Absolutely not.
All right, well, best running backs that, obviously there's LT, there's LJ. Let's go with the best running backs not picked in the first round. Who would your 2 be there? Obviously no Maurice Jones-Drew here.
Well, certainly Frank Gore. I mean, he was drafted, probably as early as the 3rd round. He's been great. With the trade for Kevin Barlow, he was allowed to become the #1 back, and he's certainly proven that he's worth it. And Willie Parker, I mean, you're talking about 2 weeks when he had over 200 yards rushing. He's really taken over where Jerome Bettis left off in terms of getting the touchdowns and being the guy to carry the ball there. So he's been great for the Steelers, and again, another guy that wasn't drafted in the 1st round.
Yeah, and Willie Parker this season set the record for most rushing yards in a single game, passing Frenchie Fuqua, who wouldn't have been a bad fantasy player himself back in the day. All right, Jamey, one more set of good awards to hand out, and it is the holiday season. We'll call it the best presents of the year. Guys that you drafted, but you got a lot more out of than you thought you would have.
Sure, certainly you're talking about Drew Brees at quarterback. We did a story on Sportsline a few weeks ago about winning percentage, and Drew Brees was the #1 quarterback in terms of fantasy users that had him on their team, their winning percentage as a fantasy owner. And Drew Brees has been better than Peyton Manning at times, and he's certainly been the #2 quarterback throughout the season. Was drafted as a potential backup quarterback, a guy to use during the bye replacement. So he's been phenomenal for the Saints and for fantasy users. And then a couple wide receivers, T.J. Houshmandzadeh, he's been great. We actually ranked him. Dave Richard and I would do the rankings for week in, week out. This week we ranked him ahead of Chad Johnson because he's been that good. And then Javon Walker had a little bit of a struggle during the weeks with Plummer into Cutler, but now that Jay Cutler's really established himself, Javon Walker this entire season, even when Plummer struggled, has still been a #1 receiver and is certainly a phenomenal find depending on where you drafted him.
If you took those 3 huge weeks that Chad Johnson had out of the middle of the season, Houshmandzadeh blew him out of the water, and he didn't even start the beginning of the season of injury. All right, Jamey, with every good, there's always bad, and in some cases, the guys who, in fantasy-wise, you were better off dropping or maybe just ignoring after picking them high in the draft. Jamey, give me 2 at each spot. Let's start with the quarterbacks. We'll call these the coal and the stuffing, or the stockings.
Sure. Sure. Well, certainly Kurt Warner came into the season, with high expectations. They had Edgerrin James coming in. Those 2 wide receivers, Anquan Bolden and Larry Fitzgerald, and Kurt Warner really didn't get it done. Matt Leinart replaced him, and you know the story there, even though Kurt Warner is starting in Week 17 because of Leinert's injury. Jake Delhomme is another guy. Obviously, everybody knows the injury that he's dealt with the last few weeks. But even prior to that, I mean, with Steve Smith, he didn't really connect with him too well. Keyshawn Johnson was brought in. They really didn't get along, all that well in what you expected. So.
And what about the running backs, Jamey?
So running backs, Cadillac Williams is another guy. You gotta look at where he was drafted. Certainly he's been a disappointment. Lamont Jordan, another guy. The Raiders really just didn't take advantage of his best asset, which is as a receiver. So he's really struggled. And then a couple wide receivers. Chris Chambers. I mean, Jason, the last time we did video together, he threw a pen at me, and I didn't catch it. Chris Chambers didn't catch many balls this year, so he certainly struggled. And also Randy Moss. Again, he wants out of Oakland. He's really struggled with the quarterback situation there, the offensive line there. He's not happy. So those 2 guys really have struggled this year.
And Lamont Jordan, halfway through the season, was put on injured reserve, and he was done for the year as well. And he was definitely a late first-round and at worst, early second-round draft pick. All right, folks, there you have it, the best and the worst. And as for how that'll relate to next year, be sure to check out roster trends coming up on Wednesday. Jamey, thanks a lot. We'll talk to you then.
You got it, Jason.
That'll do it for the final Who's Hot, Who's Not for 2006, but roster trends for all your keeper needs, and then your last stardom sit-em for 2006 comes your way this week as well. Until then, I'm Jason Horowitz. Take care.